Yo, yo, yo. Y'all missed us? Because we missed y'all too. It's Running with WARR. Normally, Kyle will be taking over the show. Shout out to Kyle, who's our co-founder, lead editor, all the above. But this time, he's allowing me to run the show. So y'all stuck with me. It's your boy, Joshua M. Hicks, who is also the co-host of In the Scope. Check it out every week, every Friday, via WARR Media. And also check out a very awesome co-host for this specific episode of Running with WARR, and Drew, the one and only. And we have a special guest, Ricky O'Donnell, who's been a guest and friend of the show, as always. Appreciate you having him on. And we got a lot to talk about, because, we are a basketball group. This is a basketball show. But overall, it is Chicago. So we gotta talk about all things Chicago when it comes to hoops. But let's start off just for now. Let's talk about the NBA as a whole. Because the NBA as a whole, like we talked about earlier, it's like 2K every year now. Like, you always playing some type of big trade. You always have some type of big free agent acquisition. Something always goes down to where you pretty much, if you were a kid playing 2K and you wanted to stack your team, we found the best ways to do so through 2K. Now it's a reality. There's a whole bunch of trades that went down. You had CP3 trade that went down. The fiasco in Houston, when you want to talk about James Harden wanting out to go team up with the big two over in Brooklyn, and Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving. And aside from that, you want Russell Westbrook to leave. And as of right now, dude's gone. He's a wizard. And I don't know if the trade itself is more crazy, because the trade was pretty much a superstar for a superstar, with Westbrook being traded for John Wall. But let's start with that trade, because even though it's a superstar for a superstar, and some people may look at it and be like, okay, cool, it's just a superstar swap. But for Houston's sake, for me, I think this is actually a big time move for Houston, because of the fact that you got Boogie Cousins there. Now that you got Boogie Cousins as your big man, who always wanted to play with John Wall, since just like they did back in the Kentucky days, if he can stay healthy, John Wall is as healthy as is on point as many people are saying that it is. I don't know. You're talking about a nice, a nice combination between John Wall and Boogie Cousins, with James Harden as as the primary guy. That can keep you at least in the loop in the Western Conference. It'll keep you afloat a little bit. So I think if anything, this really helps out Boogie Cousins. But let's start off with Drew. What was your thoughts when you initially heard the breaking news, of John Wall being traded to the Rockets for Russell Westbrook? And how do you think both players can really benefit from this trade?
So I think I could probably speak for a lot of us when I say that when that trade first came across, it was surprising, but then again, it wasn't, because we've heard a lot of talk about those two players and how they might be on the move. My other thought was, if Wall can stay healthy, and that's a big if considering the last couple of years, I think he could make a difference for them, being more so. His first gear, I think, is to facilitate more so than Westbrook. And that could play into James Harden's favor as well as Boogie Cousins. Again, if he can stay healthy too. Then on the flip side of it, with Washington, just seeing how the dynamic between him and Bill works, what it is they may have in store, if this is the only move that they're going to make, or is this something, kind of a domino effect of things to come. I don't know that this puts Washington much higher than they may have already, been prospected to get to. But we'll see. I think it'll have a bigger short-term impact on Houston and what they can do. Again, the big if is Wall and DeMarcus Cousins staying healthy. I know they picked up Christian Wood too, and people are really high on him. So we'll see what happens, man. But it looks right now to be a win for, I would say, more so for Houston.
Ricky, give us your thoughts on what that trade could potentially mean for both teams, and how, especially when you're talking about, like you mentioned, John Wall, who came off these two egregious injuries of an ACL tear and an Achilles. Like, he hasn't played full basketball in about 2 years. It's like, so how does this trade for him affect him, not just physically, as we try to figure out what his game is going to be like and how much in shape he's going to be in and his actual skill set himself, but also his mental health. Like, could this actually benefit him mentally coming from a situation in Washington where it was really up in the air for a while, trying to figure out if they even wanted to keep him because he signed that big contract and there's no guarantee that, he's going to come back to becoming the John Wall that they expected him to be. Do you think this trade, for his sake, really could benefit John Wall mentally as he takes on this next chapter?
Yeah, it should be way less pressure on him, right? Like, he was the number 1 overall draft pick, the homegrown star, signed the big contract, like you said, and it should be noted, he absolutely deserved that deal. I mean, he was one of the best players in the league. They gave him the big deal. That's why those big deals exist, to stop your homegrown superstars from going to LA or going to New York. So he absolutely deserved that deal. He is for sure one of the best point guards of our generation, I would say. But he hasn't played since late 2018. So it's like the guy's just hasn't played a basketball game in, a year or multiple years at this point. So 2 years, I guess. And it's crazy. Like, I don't really know how his game is going to age. I do think it's interesting for sure. Like, I totally agree with what Drew said about how he's more of a natural facilitator. That probably works well next to Harden. The way the Rockets have played the last few years is they've just put shooters around Harden and let everyone else like be a spot up threat around the perimeter while Harden did his one-on-one thing. I'm very interested to see if that's going to continue. Are they going to try to use Harden more like off ball now and let Wall run the show? I think that could be pretty interesting. And from Washington's perspective, I kind of like it. I think that they included a first-round pick in it, a 2023 protected first-rounder. So we don't know what the protections yet are on that pick. But I think there's probably a pretty good chance that Westbrook still has a decent amount left in the tank. He was pretty solid during the last regular season. Then the bubble hit. He had COVID, and he wasn't very good in the bubble. But I don't really want to judge his last season strictly on what he did in the bubble because he had the virus, and over the course of a longer period of time during the regular season, he was pretty solid. So I look at all the shooters that Washington has. You got Bradley Beal, one of the best shooters in terms of two guards in the league. You got Bertrands, who's just an absolute sniper. He's one of the best pure shooters in basketball. So I feel like the best way to maximize Westbrook is to just put him around a lot of shooters and let Westbrook, not feel any pressure to take outside shots. Just let him be able to operate in the paint, kick out to the perimeter. So I kind of like it for Washington is my initial response, but we'll see what the protections are on that pick. And yeah, it's a wild trade. Like if someone would have told us this 3 years ago or 4 years ago or something, we would have been like, wow, that's got to be like one of the biggest NBA trades ever, right? And now I see it and I'm like, that's just like kind of a depressing trade. It's like two guys who are on the downhill of their careers. And yeah, I mean, Wall, obviously you can't blame him. He had the horrific Achilles injury, super tough for anyone to come back from. Russ, I feel like a lot of the criticism he gets, I feel like is a little bit overblown, but certainly it is also coming from somewhere. Like there's a lot of merit to it as well. So crazy trade. And, you just can't be surprised at any of these deals in the NBA anymore. It seems like at any point, superstars can change teams and these big trades can happen.
Yeah, that's very good points, Ricky. And I also think this trade benefits Washington because of the fact that, Russell Westbrook played with Scott Brooks, who's the head coach over there. That relationship is still there. And for them two to have, at the time, a good rapport, even before he was fired, it seemed like he had a pretty good rapport with Scott Brooks. So for that to, for that reunion to happen, could be a much more ideal situation for Westbrook than we think. But we got our man Chris. We got C Breezy on here, man. Chris Pennant.
Oh, Chris.
Good.
Chris Pennant from one of the Runnin with WARR guys. Rocking the Joakim Noah.
Had to do it, man.
I feel you, man. I feel you. We're gonna touch on the Chicago legend in a second. But right now we're talking about the blockbuster trade that just went down between Russell Westbrook being traded to the Washington Wizards for John Wall in the first, and like Ricky mentioned, a 2023, I believe, first round pick. Chris, talk about basically, who do you think would win this trade? I think it's kind of even, depending on if the situations are right. But at the same time, Drew and Ricky brought up great points regarding, the health of John Wall, but how it can benefit him, especially with his relationship with Boogie Cousins. You're talking about, Russell Westbrook is rapport with Scott Brooks and how if you put shooters around him, you can maybe get more out. You can maximize more out of Russell Westbrook because he doesn't have to do too much, especially with Bill there. I mean, what are your thoughts on this whole blockbuster trade thing? Because the NBA keeps giving on fireworks every offseason.
Well, first and foremost, I'm not going to buy into the usual, the typical analysis of win-loss, right? Like you said, Josh, I think this trade is going to pretty much even out for both of these teams, partially because they are, I would put them possibly right around the middle of contention for their respective conferences. The Nets and Bucks are still better than the Wizards. There's the Heat, I think, are still even better than the Wizards after this trade, which I know is kind of iffy with their team. They're a good sum of parts in Miami, but nobody would really see them outside of Jimmy Butler as like a superstar, a downhill running, a train running downhill. But I think those three teams at the very least are better than the Wizards still. But I like putting Russ back next to Scott Brooks again. And it's odd to say, but I like putting him next to Bradley Beal, if only because no matter what everybody said, that Wall-Beal relationship was just so tortured, if not forever fractured. There was really no coalescing again for them. It's going to be difficult for Washington. Washington, I think, has been in kind of a tailspin since KD went to free agency, and everybody was hoping that he would come back to his home base around Rockville, and he didn't. And they've been trying to kind of figure out how they can move forward best. And they haven't gotten to that point yet. We've just gotten a few great all-star shooting campaigns from Bradley Beal and not much else. So I think this is going to help Washington, if for no other reason, to give them more offensive punch. And hopefully Scott Brooks can stabilize Russ to the point where he's away from having to shine again. He's not a binary star anymore with Harden. He's working with Bradley Beal, and I think that he can use his passing skill set and ability to take over a game with facilitation when he wants to in a better capacity. This is just, my thoughts of what I would hope to happen. On the Houston side, it gets Wall out of Washington, out of that organization, not the city. It was great, I think, in the city, but not for the organization. And the Rockets are just kind of treading water while they pick up the pieces from their super analytics era with Daryl Morey being gone. So I don't think anybody wins the trade. I think it's pretty even for both of them. Time will tell if it's good. It happened hours ago, so we can't even. Nobody in their right mind can actually tell you if this is a good or bad trade yet. And anybody who says that to you, I think is lying, or they have the highest opinion of themselves. But I think it's something that we're really going to have to wait and see on, because like Ricky said, we're still waiting for John Wall to come back to 75 or 80% of what he once was after that Achilles injury. And we don't know if that's his best or if that is greater than what he can hope to be going forward. So we don't know. It's really hard to say. We don't know. I think in the short term, it's good to get those two guys out of situations that they didn't want to be in. And I think that both of those players provide something for their teams that they didn't really have.
That's true. That's true, Chris. And you want to talk about scenarios where, other people are switching places. Yeah, Chris Paul, he got traded to Phoenix. He left OKC to get traded to the Phoenix Suns. And that trade was a big trade because, Oklahoma City continues to wheel and deal and have all these picks for the next decade. So they may have the best young all-star team out there for their future. But at the same time, Phoenix got a veteran point guard that not only can help elevate Devin Booker in backcourt, but you want to talk about that pick and roll with DeAndre Ayton. I think that's where DeAndre Ayton is really going to thrive this year under Chris Paul. I think Chris Paul's leadership and his point guard savviness to get DeAndre Ayton in the right spots for him to flourish, I think is going to be the biggest win for Phoenix, especially since, free agency wise, it's hard to get superstars to go over there. And that team is on the rise behind the leadership of, head coach Monty Williams. I mean, Drew, Chris Paul, as an old veteran guy in the league, he's still collecting his big checks. But how much of a benefit will this new team, in your opinion, really not just benefit Devin Booker, but even Chris Paul himself? Like, how can he truly benefit from this new environment that, so you can argue was pretty much like OKC from the beginning of the season, what everybody else thought was they may or may not make the playoffs, but there's some talent there. So how do you feel that Chris Paul can really elevate this Phoenix Suns team?
Sorry, guys. No, I was just saying. I think that for the Phoenix Suns, it's a reinvigoration of energy. I think for the first time since Devin Booker has been there, they're not just going to be rolling the ball out and hoping on a wish and a prayer and a star, man. Like, they actually got somebody that can run the show, that can get guys in the right spots. Potentially make life so much easier for Devin Booker. They should definitely be in the playoff conversation. I doubt that they're going to be seriously contending for a championship because the West is just, it is what it is, man. I mean, the Lakers are what they are, and they've made so many great moves in this offseason to improve their roster even more. But it's just confidence. I think it's just confidence to actually be playing for something that I don't think they've been able to, recently. And I want to see what that's going to do. That should work wonders for them. Like you said, everybody's game should be ratcheted up a notch. Chris Paul is an awesome leader. He's one of those guys that's not going to let you play down to your potential. He's going to bring, hopefully, the best out of everybody around him. And they should be competing, like I said, for a playoff spot, for sure.
Yeah, Phoenix really showed a lot of promise, at least in the bubble, going undefeated in the bubble. Devin Booker really showed that he can elevate his game to the next level, especially when it comes to facilitating for others. And, like you said, having Chris Paul, seeing what he did, not just with that team as a whole, but really specifically Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, to elevate his game in that backcourt to where now the team is ready to build around Shai Gilgeous. That's something that I think Chris Paul can really add to the team. But I want to switch over, Ricky, to another big trade that went down this offseason, which was Drew Holiday going to the Bucks. Milwaukee's trying to do everything that they can to make sure that Giannis, stays in Milwaukee. Chris, you're something else. But anyways, like to be, I don't think it's enough. I doubt they did enough to keep Giannis there. If I'm Giannis, I'm not signing that max extension. I'm exploring all my options. But what could these trades mean, for Milwaukee as you're talking about? Because from Milwaukee, obviously it was, whenever you have Giannis on your team, it's technically title or bust. But at the same time, Bucks can't even think title or bust at this point. They got to think just past the first or second round, especially after last season when to lose to Miami Heat the way that they did. So talk about how beneficial this trade is for the Milwaukee Bucks, and where do you see this really taking them for this upcoming season?
Yeah, well, Drew Holiday's awesome. Really good player. He's not like a superstar, I wouldn't say, but he's like a very impactful role player because he brings it on both ends. His point of attack defense is really good. Offensively, he can hit threes and he can get to the rim. So I think, like, if you look at the guards the Bucks had last year with Bledsoe, who was pretty brutal in the playoffs. Bledsoe was a really good regular season player, I always thought. But in the playoffs, like, his lack of shooting really came under a harsh spotlight. So I think Holiday's a huge upgrade over what the Bucks had last year in the backcourt. The problem with the Bucks is that their Bogdanovich move fell apart. And I loved the idea of pairing those two guys together, Holiday and Bogdanovich, because then you're just sort of like all in on this super awesome starting five. You massively upgraded both backcourt spots. But I guess like the Bucks just jumped the gun announcing the Bogdanovich deal. He ends up landing in Atlanta in free agency, who offered him more money. So I feel like the inability to actually land Bogdanovich is really going to hold them back. I'm totally with you that the Bucks have championship or bust expectations, but that, they still got to prove they can get past the upper echelon of the East before we're talking about them as a title favorite. I would like to see them fire Budenholzer, who I know is a great regular season coach, but I thought like his inability to adjust during the postseason was just a real killer for that team. I thought like potentially they could have gotten back in that series with some easy coaching adjustments. So then, the big question is, how does it affect Giannis? Because the Bucks traded away all these future draft picks to get Drew Holiday. They traded 3 future first rounders and 2 pick swaps, which is like in ridiculous amount to give up for Drew Holiday. But the thinking is that, well, if it gets Giannis to stay, then obviously it's a great move. Giannis is a once-in-a-generation player. You do everything you can to keep him. I would agree with what Josh said, that I do not think Giannis should sign that deal. But if I'm Giannis, I would actually and I haven't seen anyone talk about this, so I'm not really sure if there's like a CBA rule preventing it or something. But I would sign the shorter deal that LeBron signed, Kevin Durant signed, and Kawhi Leonard signed. Like when those guys were going up to free agency, no one ever said, yeah, they should sign the Supermax, 5 years, lock it in. Instead, what they did is they took 2-year deals with player options. And I think that would probably be really beneficial for Giannis, for one, because it would just get the heat of free agency off his back this year. Just sign a 1 or 2 year extension. Don't sign the full boat. Say, yeah, I'm going to be here for the next year, next 2 years. And let's be honest, Giannis is all the power. Giannis is by himself more valuable than everything else associated with that team. So if I'm Giannis, I want to keep the team in the palm of my hand. I want to continue to pressure them to improve. And if it gets to a point, like, you look at the Bucks supporting cast, Drew Holiday's got a couple good years left, I think, but he is 30. Middleton is like 29, I think, at his peak right now for sure. Brook Lopez is like 33 or something. They have no more draft picks. They just traded them all. They don't have any salary cap space. They don't have any good young players, really. So if I'm Giannis, like, why would I want to stay 5 years there? But I do think there's a benefit to just being like, I'll sign a 1 or 2 year extension. I'll take the heat off everyone's back coming into this season, and then we'll figure it out from there. So I'm with you that I don't really think that the Bucks, like, I'm not going to pick the Bucks to win the title. I would love to see them come out of the East. I was rooting for them last year. It would be a great story. I'd love to see Giannis do it, but they still got some holes in their team, no doubt. Not landing Bogdanovich hurt. And yeah, I think Giannis's best move is keeping his options open.
That's a smart idea for Giannis to actually get that maybe 1 or 2 year extension, get the max out of that 1 or 2 years, and put pressure on that team. I mean, like you mentioned, LeBron is the king of doing that, to be honest with you. And you want to talk about LeBron, he's over here being real happy right now in LA because of their offseason moves, which includes a trade to get Dennis Schroeder to the Lakers from Oklahoma City. I thought that was a very underrated move for them. And Chris, real briefly before we end this segment, talk about how this specific trade for the Lakers really benefits them, especially with them losing Rajon Rondo to free agency. I thought Dennis Schroeder was younger. I thought he shows that he can play off the ball, which is huge with LeBron handling the ball as much as he is within this offense. And at the same time, he can score in any way you want. He's improved his 3-point shooting as well as the ability to get to the basket at any time. And he's a dog. He has that aggressive defensive mentality. So talk about how much of a trade, even though it wasn't talked about a lot, but I think this was a very impactful trade for the Lakers to make if they want to, since they're going after this repeat.
Yeah, Schroeder's been a nice young player for a long time. I think he's what we thought, or at least what I thought Reggie Jackson could have been. And it was a very interesting parallel since they were both on the Thunder about the same time. But when Schroeder went to Atlanta, coming off the heels of their Spurs East tenure, was, I think, when he started to really come out of his shell as more than what he was, which was a speed demon who could, make his way down the lane, get to the rim, distribute the ball fairly nicely. Like you said, Josh, he's a dog. I think there's still the lingering idea that European players are still somewhat soft from like the 70s and 80s. And so he disproved that. He's played through injury. He's put up nice numbers pretty much wherever he's gone. And he's been a good point guard who can start, can come off the bench at and he's going to give you about the same. He's going to be about the same level of effectiveness. So bringing him in isn't going to, I think he also, I think, gets along a little bit better than Rondo does. With a LeBron-led team, getting along really isn't an issue unless you're a guy who's has the potential to be a superstar or was a superstar or is a superstar. So then you have some friction with guys like Kyrie and Kevin Love. Schroeder isn't that guy. He's a cog that's going to fit into that machine. And like you said, all of the stats show you exactly what he's going to bring to the table for Los Angeles. So he's not going to replace Rajon Rondo, even at this stage of his career, I think. He'll give you something different, but he won't give you the same. When you have two guys with the level of passing IQ as LeBron and Rondo on the same team, it's hard to replace that. It's hard to find another guy who's going to give you that level of distribution and passing in terms of making your offense that much more difficult to defend. But Schroeder's going to give you a consistent presence. You at the free throw line, you won't be able to foul him late in games. You're going to have to check him on the perimeter because he can either shoot or get around you to the rim. And it's pretty simple. He's a good guy to add. It's a very good under the radar move.
Yes, under the radar, but he's gonna have a handful if he thinks he's gonna be the starting point guard, like he said. I mean, I don't know how you're gonna be a starting point guard and expect LeBron not to be running the show over there. But hey, like that's LeBron's situation to figure out. So we hope that Dennis Schroeder doesn't cause too much chaos coming up in there trying to take over that point guard spot, because we all know it's LeBron's show over there.
Well, I think he's the guy. He's been around long enough to know who he is. Like he fed off Russ when he was in Oklahoma City with Russ and getting into that little feud with Damian Lillard. But he's not a guy who's trying to take all of the limelight at once, right? We haven't seen anything like that from Dennis Schroeder to this point, and he's at least 5 or 6 years deep into the league. So I don't think we're going to see it. It's got to be more than that. What is it, 7 years?
Yeah, he was in the 14 draft, I think. One thing that's interesting about Schroeder is that he was on the Thunder last year, and they played a bunch of 3-guard lineups with CP3, Shea, and Schroeder. You don't really see NBA teams do like 3-point guard lineups like that, but they were awesome. They would like run everyone off the floor. They just had a lot of guys who could shoot, pass, and dribble. You don't get that level of creation ability with 3 different guys on the floor on your team very often. And by the numbers, at one point last season, they were the best 3-man combination in the league playing together in terms of like net rating. So I think that Schroeder is going to be pretty interesting in LA because he's not like he's a point guard, but he's not like a point guard who's going to be like a main facilitator, run the show. Like LeBron led the league in assists last year. So LeBron's still going to be running the show, but I feel like Schroeder gives you just a little bit more off the dribble scoring ability than Rondo. But as Chris correctly noted, obviously he's not giving you quite as much passing or basketball IQ. But I really like the Lakers' moves this offseason. Like, full disclosure, last year, I was a total hater of the Lakers. I picked them to lose to the Clippers in the conference finals. At the start of the year, I was like really down on the Lakers too. So I was doubting them the entire year. They totally proved me wrong. I was going to pick them to win the title this year regardless of what happened because they proved me so wrong last year. And I think they only got better. So it'll be interesting to see, like, everyone was really clowning Danny Green, but he was still a pretty solid 3-and-D guy, all things considered. His play definitely slipped, but like opposing defenses still respected his 3-point shot. His defense was at least adequate. So I do think that that's kind of like an interesting missing piece for them. Like, will they miss Danny Green? Probably not. But you want 3-and-D guys around LeBron. So there's at least something to be said for that. But in general, I think, in the West, Lakers, who's going to beat them, right? Like, that's kind of what I'm thinking right now. Like, the Clippers didn't really make enough dynamic moves. I do like Ty Lue taking over as head coach there. I think that'll be an upgrade, actually, over Doc. I think Ty Lue will make adjustments and hold guys accountable, and I think he's a really good head coach. But, I still think the Lakers got to be viewed as the favorites coming in.
Yep. And those are all good points, Ricky, because after this quick little break, we are going to talk about free agency as well as Clippers news that broke out regarding trouble in Paradise's locker room. Interesting news with that. And after that, we are going to talk about, of course, the Chicago Bulls and the moves they made this offseason from free agency to the draftees as we head up to training camp here in the Midwest. So stay tuned for that. We'll be right back.